Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. I am so glad you're here today. My name is Ashley and we're doing another Finance Friday episode. This episode is all about how my husband and I saved our first $100,000 before we turned 30. And it's a doozy. There is a lot to unpack and it is not the happy-go-lucky story that I think I want to present, or part of me wants to present to all of you, because we definitely had differing opinions on how to manage our money, and it took us time before we kind of aligned in our vision together, and I'll get into that in a second. My husband and I met when we were in college. He was finishing up his bachelor's degree. He had a double major in finance and information systems. I was finishing up my first year of my master's degree in educational psychology. We met, we fell in love, all that great stuff. He got a job offer before we got married out in the Bay Area, so in San Francisco, at one of the big four accounting firms. And after he proposed to me, I realized I needed to find a job out in the Bay Area, and I had to leave my master's program early, so I actually took a year leave of absence, moved to the Bay Area, and I actually found a job in Livermore, California. So for those not familiar with the geography of the Bay Area, San Francisco is on one end, Livermore is about 30 miles away, and we needed to find a place to live in between those two areas. We settled on Oakland, California. And that is where conflict number one came about, because all the places that we looked to rent in Oakland were kind of sketchy, because my husband had a very strict budget in mind with what he was willing to spend. Now, our combined income was just over $100,000 a year. So in my mind, I thought our budget was a little bit more flexible, but my husband had a much more, how shall I say this, strict vision of where he wanted to go in the future, and he really wanted to keep our expenses super low. Of course, the goal being that we could buy a house one day, and the sooner we can get up to a down payment and save up for a down payment, the sooner we can move out of an apartment and start gaining equity in a home, right? So I was like, okay, I guess. We looked at some studio apartments in very shady areas. We looked at an apartment with a bathroom so small it wouldn't even have bathed one of my current children. We didn't have kids at the time, but just to paint a picture. And at the same time, our peers, our friends, were buying apartments or renting apartments in the city, right in San Francisco, which is one of the most expensive places in the United States to live. They were renting these nice apartments, and I'll admit, I would look at that and go, I want that. Here we are in Oakland in a very tiny apartment. So we actually got really lucky. We found some landlords who were looking for really good tenants. I think they took pity on us as a newly married couple, and they had a very small mother-in-law unit above their main floor unit, and it kind of had this really pretty view of the lake. And it was $980 a month, which is kind of at the top of my husband's budget, or our budget, I guess you can say. We went for it, and it was actually a good apartment. I think we actually got really lucky, because when we moved out, she was able to immediately up the rent a few $100s, and it rented out really fast for that new price. So my husband is very much a natural saver. Spending money is kind of painful for him. He's not inclined to buy himself treats or luxuries. At the time we met, I don't think he'd ever gone out to eat. He doesn't buy himself treats. He can just live extremely simply. In fact, when he was living in San Francisco as well, we were engaged long distance for a few months. He lived in a San Francisco house with 10 other guys. He lived in the garage on a cot with 3 other guys in the garage. And he paid $400 a month for that. The rest of the guys lived in the house, but that was too rich for his blood. He was like, no, I'll just be in the garage, thank you very much, on a cot. That explains my husband. I think that paints a very clear picture of who he is. So we had to kind of merge our personalities. I kind of liked, I don't know, to me, bougier things, but maybe to everyone else it's normal things. I kind of leaned, I'm not a huge spender. I didn't have credit card debt. I did have student loan debt, which I'll get into in a second. But I liked shopping and getting yummy groceries and good groceries. I don't mind splurging a little bit and spending a little bit and getting myself treats every now and then. Again, nothing crazy, but we did have to kind of blend our spending styles and compromise a lot. We had to compromise quite a bit just about finances our first few years of marriage. We did align on a budget, and we did figure out a vision and a goal for ourselves, but it wasn't without a lot of work. And I think, to be fair, every couple has to figure out their financial balance, right? So we just went through that process just like anyone else, and we got along great everywhere else in life, but the finances could always be just a bit of a touchy subject. Finally, we did align though. We had a budget we both agreed on. We had our mother-in-law unit apartment. We had a budget for groceries, but it was a strict budget. We still drove our crappy cars. We still weren't getting like new clothes and new things, new computers, nothing like that. We didn't have a TV. Date nights for us looked like going to Yogurtland and sharing a yogurt and chatting in our car in Berkeley, California. That's what we do. Berkeley was like a nearby city. Occasionally we'd go to a movie if we were splurging a little bit, but we kind of just put our heads down and saved and saved and saved. We didn't have any furniture. It was a furnished mother-in-law unit except for the mattress, so we got that. They had a futon that was kind of like our couch, so that was already furnished. And our dining room table was a card table. Literally, I put like a tablecloth on it to make it look a little bit nicer. And some nights, like when we were super into the show Lost, I mean, this is years ago, we would push our card table up to our desk, turn our computer monitor out facing us, and enjoy a dinner while watching Lost on our computer, because again, we didn't have a TV. We lived simply. And to be honest, you guys, those were some of my most favorite and cherished memories with my husband. Sharing a Yogurtland treat, watching Lost with our $2 steaks that I found on sale, and eating it and watching the show. I mean, we had really fun times, and I know that sounds so dumb because we weren't spending hardly any money, but you really don't need to spend money to have fun. Of course, it's worth it to spend money on fun memories, but we had so much fun and laughter and joy in those first 2 years of our marriage in Oakland, California. Things took an even more frugal turn. About 1.5 years into our mother-in-law unit apartment, we found an opportunity to become apartment managers in an apartment complex just across the lake. And when you're an apartment manager in the Bay Area, or I think this just goes for anywhere, you pretty much have free rent. And your job though is to manage the units, collect rent. There's all kinds of things that you are in charge of when you are the apartment manager. So I was working, my husband was working, and we were managing these apartments, and the owner of the building would call me like every single day. He had one maintenance worker that he liked to work with, I think because he got a pretty good deal with this guy, and I would assign the maintenance worker all of the maintenance that needed to be done in these apartments because I was also getting calls from tenants like all the time. I had a guy who would call me and say he had mushrooms growing out of his carpet because there was a leak, water leaks in windows, break-ins, paint chipping, I mean, you name it. Things were going wrong. One woman even fell down in her apartment and called me because she couldn't get up, and I wasn't there, and I was like, why aren't you calling 911? You need to call someone to help you. And I wished I could have helped her, and she did find help and she was okay, but we were getting calls all the time, and it was, so getting that free rent was like not without its own pain points for sure. The apartment complex that we were in was also in like a shadier area, so there were break-ins. We were right next door to a halfway house. My husband's car was broken into. But we were told before we moved in actually, like, oh, there might be break-ins, but they'll just steal your stuff and leave you alone. So that made me feel really secure sleeping at night. I think our apartment itself was broken into before we moved in. Like the window was right near a rooftop clearing that was kind of easily accessible. Anyway, didn't sleep so great there, but we did save money. I mean, these are the sacrifices that we made. I'm just kind of trying to paint a picture of like, we lived so frugally, we lived well below our means. Now it was because of this that when my student loans came due about 1 year into our marriage, we get the letter that says, hey, you owe $15,000 in student loans, me. My husband didn't have any student loan debt, and that's because he paid his way through school. His parents helped him with the first couple of years, and then he sold pest control in the summers, and that paid for the rest of his tuition for the rest of his years in school. So he didn't graduate with any debt. I did though, about $15,000, like I said. We were able to just pay that off in full. We called our brother-in-law, technically my husband's brother-in-law. He's a financial advisor, and he told us, hey, if you have the money, pay it off now and be done. And so we did. We paid that off in full. We established our emergency fund. We saved. And then my husband got a job in Salt Lake City. I was really looking forward to living somewhere that wasn't quite as expensive, where we wouldn't have to apartment manage. Luckily, my work allowed me to work remotely, so that was a huge blessing. My husband's new job did pay a little bit more, so we were able to get a slightly more comfortable apartment in Salt Lake City, I was able to actually finish my master's program because I had taken that leave of absence and they allowed me to come back into the program from there. So it worked out great. We were still in a small apartment. We still saved. And before we knew it, we had enough to not only have our 6 to 8 month emergency fund fully funded, more so probably in place, but we had about $60,000 to then put down on our first home. No PMI. We reduced our mortgage by a lot that way by putting so much down, and that was when we had our first $100,000. We had our full emergency fund, my husband's retirement account. He had been putting that away since the very beginning of his work career when he was 25. We had both of our Roth IRAs going, we had our HSA going, and like I said, our emergency fund, and then the extra $60,000 to put down in that first home. And this was in 2013. And then once we realized that that wasn't exactly the home that we thought it was, and it had some issues, we were able to sell that house, take all of that equity plus a little bit more because house prices at this time were going up a little bit, and roll it into this house. And then we've just continued those habits from there. Save as much as we can, live below our means. During this whole time, we were driving our old cars and not really getting anything new and fancy, not traveling at all unless points paid for it. So we have always used credit card points to pay for our travel, and that will be the topic of another video. We pay our credit cards off in full every single month, but we do use the benefits to pay for our travel. In fact, we've never really paid cash for any of the trips that we've taken, except, Disneyland tickets. But we just got into this habit of living well below our means. And living this way and sacrificing this way was the only way that we personally were able to make that 100K before we turned 30 and use it to put a huge down payment on our home. Our net worth has grown leaps and bounds since then because that first 100,000 I think was the hardest to earn. I mean, it was earned by blood, sweat, and tears by us. So many sacrifices. And I think like old Ash would have said, did you have to go that hard? Did you have to sacrifice that much? Did you have to be so tight and so restrictive? Probably not, but looking back, I'm incredibly grateful, and I would say it was worth it. I mean, it wasn't fun, it was super hard, and I look back, we looked really weird to our peers, and we didn't have the same luxuries as our friends. We saw them getting new cars and doing fun things, traveling and going to fancy restaurants, and I mean, it's really hard not to compare, and I think part of me really wanted that. And yes, occasionally we would splurge on a fancy dinner for our anniversary or, a special day, but we really just still kept it pretty tight and pretty frugal. We upgraded our car to an older Honda. We love it though. I mean, the only desires that we have for vehicles are Honda or Toyota. I don't think we have aspirations beyond that. And I think it's because, over time, I think old Ash might have wanted a newer, fancier car, but Ash now appreciates things so much more and understands a lot better that the stuff that you buy now not only costs what you paid for it, but what it could have potentially earned had it been invested. Old Ash has now morphed into new Ash, who is a lot more like her husband, TJ, because I now see that very clearly. The earnings potential that money has, and is this purchase really worth it? Looking back, it was so worth all the sacrifices that we made to accelerate and get ahead for ourselves with what we wanted to accomplish as a couple, with our net worth, with our money, because now our net worth has grown a ton. We don't have any debt. We have a really bright future ahead. Our expenses are still extremely low. Looking back, I think it was super worth it. It was super hard, and there were so many times I just felt incredibly frustrated. But this feeling of peace and security, there is no price you can put on that. The feeling of knowing all of our ducks are in a row. We have our investments, we have our retirement, we have our health savings account very safely tucked away. We can cover emergencies, we can cover dental, medical, the births of our children, we have their colleges set up. We can handle emergencies if they come our way. If a car breaks down, if we have a leak in our house, if we need a new roof, we could cover all of these expenses because we are careful, and that mental peace is worth more than anything else could have been worth back then. I would just want to add that it is still worth it to me to spend money on really fun and amazing memories. Taking my kids to their first college football game where Utah stomped Oregon, it was amazing. It was so fun. I will never forget that, and I don't think the kids will either. Trips to Disneyland, taking the kids to Moab was so much fun. We love having these travel memories with our kids, and that's where I think it is worth it to spend some money if you can, if points and travel hacks don't cover it on their own. But other than that, my husband and I have really aligned on a vision for ourselves and a goal for ourselves that we're kind of locked in with. I'll just say it's very, very hard to find material things, depreciating assets that are worth it to us these days. We both know it can just go so fast, and it can go to such stupid purchases that it is better to just save and put that money away into places it can grow and grow, so that, again, we can build the life we've always dreamed of, retire early, travel with our kids, build our dream home one day. These are all goals that we have, and it just takes some sacrifice and work to get there. We're definitely not as strict these days as we were, but we do still have the same goals and the same vision in mind, and we're getting there, and it's really exciting. Thank you so much for joining me for this video, you guys. I don't know if it helped, I don't know if it was interesting, but I loved sharing it with you. If you liked it and if you enjoyed it, giving me a thumbs up is a very easy way to show appreciation for my channel, and don't forget to subscribe if you want videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, all about how I run my business from home and how we try to manage our money wisely. Thanks again, you guys. I appreciate you. Take care, and I will catch you next time.